Hello and welcome to the Eagle and Child podcast. I am super excited about our next guest today. Her name is Tiffany Voss, aka Girl Boss Voss, and she is going to be telling us all about John Bunyan. She is married to Brian. Her and her husband are part of the Theos University community, and they were co-founders there. She's living in Palm Springs at the moment, was from Canada, has been in ministry her whole life, building her dad's church. She's super prophetic. She is just an amazing woman of God, and I'm so excited to have her sharing on John Bunyan today. So welcome, Tiff. It's so great to have you with us.
Oh, it's so great to be here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming on. It's awesome.
Thank you for asking me to. This is an honor.
Oh, no worries. So you're talking about John Bunyan today. I've previously said to you, I don't know that much about John Bunyan, and we feel like not many people actually do. So yeah, can you give us a bit of an introduction to who this guy is? Why should we know him as Christians?
So John Bunyan was actually the author. You might have heard of his best-selling book. It was Pilgrim's Progress.
Yes.
And yeah, so I was introduced to that book as a child, and it made such a huge impact on me at a young age. I think I was like 7, maybe I was 8, but I read it because I went to a Christian school, and it was kind of like the required reading of the time.
Absolutely.
And it seemed like the type of book that I just never would have like picked up on my own. And I got into it, and it opened up a revelation of the kingdom of God for my small child brain that I had never thought of before. You know, when you're a kid, your world is so small, and you have your parents and you have your church and you have your school friends and whatever you do, but you're not thinking about like the 3,000-foot level of your life and about, you know, Christianity or about God even. And I just remember sitting there thinking about, you know, the main character, his name is Christian. So the book is an allegory.
Wow.
And it's basically about the Christian walk, and how this young man Christian, he comes across all these different characters, and some are helping him down the path that to the kingdom and toward the king, and then some are kind of steering him off course and off path, and then he goes through like up mountains and through valleys, and it's just this really beautiful allegory of the Christian walk, right? So as a kid, I was opened up to the realities and spiritual realities, kingdom of God, and my walk with the Lord, and how you know, all these different characters and all these different things that he goes through, seasons that he goes through, just really lend themselves to drawing you into the big scope of God, the large picture that, you know, I don't know, it was just really, really powerful. So anyway, John Bunyan, he many not a lot of people know about him. He was basically born in the 1600s. Born in England.
Quite a while ago.
Quite a while ago. So he's pretty old by now.
Yeah, pretty old. Yeah.
And he lived. He didn't live a long life, but the life that he did live was interesting and impacting. And as a matter of fact, he lived to be about 60 years old, and he wrote, I guess, 60 books in that time. And 4 of them are more popular. So Pilgrim's Progress would have been the most popular. He wrote one called The Holy War. And then he wrote another one called, I forget.
That's fine.
I forget what the other one is. But those are like some of his more popular. There's like 3 or 4 that are a little more popular. But yeah, he lived to be about 60, and he wrote 60 things, or 60 books.
Wow.
And out of all the ones that he wrote 2 allegories, and the rest of them were apparently just expanded sermons. So he was really a Puritan preacher.
Wow.
And yeah, it's really interesting because the time in history that he kind of became a preacher and wrote these books was during the restoration of the Puritan movement was basically the restoration of what am I trying to say? The church,
the early church, or
the early church, yeah. So like, because, you know, the kings and queens of England they were not English. They didn't have English blood in them, right? Like they were Germans and they were Russians and they were Romans and so in their countries they were primarily Catholic, right?
Yeah.
So they're coming into England and they're bringing their Catholicism and they're bringing the rituals and they're bringing those things and they're bringing them into the church.
Yes.
And after the Reformation, you know, England was like, we need that here. And we need, so the Puritans were really Calvinists and they were trying to bring that religious reform back to England to get rid of the Catholic relics that were introduced to the church in England. But of course, at that time, the king had the census. It was actually the late 1500s. The king had a census that forbade people to preach or to gather outside of 5 people in their household.
Crazy.
And preaching from anything other than the authorized Bible and the authorized book of hymns in their Anglican churches. And so
that 5 people rule sounds like a bit like Australia with COVID.
Hello, Canada too.
Yeah. We weren't allowed to sing in church on Sunday. We were singing.
I heard about that.
We sang.
I love that. I love that. You know, like we honor the Lord. I was telling a friend recently, like, could you imagine if like Daniel, you know, obeyed the government and didn't pray?
Absolutely.
Like, could you imagine
down to the statue?
Yeah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, the government said we can't. Like,
better do what the government wants.
No, that the government is not our God. But I think John Bunyan is just like such a cool dude, and his time in history, like when he emerged, was so critical. He was a part of like a rebel band, basically.
Wow.
And so he grew up going to just the regular Anglican church, like the church in Barstow, where he was born with his family. And his dad was basically a modern day hardware, like a tinker, right? Like they're just like modern day hardware store guys. They're fixing men and they kind of jack of all trades. And so he was raised in that, but he ended up going into the parliamentary army. Wow. And I'm learning so much history.
Yes.
Like, studying this stuff, it's like amazing. And I love England because of course I'm loyal to the crown, being a Canadian.
Absolutely. Same with us. Yeah. God save the Queen.
But yeah, I just found it so interesting because he was a part of this army where in one of his books talks about how, you know, he just lived like such a rebel. He lived a total backslidden lifestyle when he was a part of the army. But there was one thing that happened was he was supposed to go out into a regiment. He was supposed to go out to war with his regiment. And this young man who was a part of another regiment that was really eager to go to battle went into his bunk and said, "Hey, John, like, please switch with me. I'm dying to get on the battlefield. Like, I'm dying to go, you know, kick some butt." And John was like, "Fine, like, you can take my place. I'll stay back. I'll be you. You can be me." That day, that young man died.
Wow.
And John looks back at the grace of God on his life, and he goes like, that could have been me. And he just begins to recount in one of his books the hand of God upon his life, and he recounts all these different moments in his life where he was like, no, that was the Lord. And it caused him to kind of have a spiritual reality. So when he left the army, he records that he was walking in town one day. He went back to work for his father, and he saw a group that were congregating around, like a group of women, I believe it was, who were congregating, and they were talking about theology.
Wow.
And he kind of popped by because there were some questions in his heart and questions in his mind about God and what he had learned, you know, throughout his life, and then his experience in the army. And he really, what they were talking about and how they were talking about the church and about Jesus and about theology really struck a chord in him. And he was like, these people have it, like, this is true. And I need to listen to what they're saying. And it turned out that those women were the members or founders. Okay, women founded the church.
Which
Pretty
church?
cool. It's pretty cool. They founded, it's called the Meeting House, or the Bedford Free Church is what it was.
Bedford Free Church. Amazing.
And they were a non-conformist group. So they were the ones that were like,
Wow.
we're not conforming to whatever the king and queen are telling us to worship. Like they were bringing like, you know, they were bringing basically like the Puritan truths and doctrinal truths and Orthodox Christianity back to England.
That's
So
great.
they had this like underground meeting house, and they weren't allowed to do this. Like this was outlawed. And so he joined this church, and he records that the elders of the church and a lot of the women just began to notice a breach on him. Wow. And like he just learned, and he learned as much as he could, and they just were like, John, like you need to be released from this gift. You have a gift to preach.
Wow.
And he was like, okay. And so he started preaching, and then he started traveling a bit.
Which is still illegal, right? All of this is illegal. Yeah.
All of this is illegal. Like he's not supposed to be doing this. And he had gotten citations. He had gotten fines. He had, they had put him in jail for a bit. And under this, I think I mentioned it before, under the, I forget what it's called. It's basically that law where you're not allowed preaching anything but from the Anglican Church. A part of that was you can be thrown in jail or deported. Like they'll kick you out of England and send you to Australia.
Yeah, exactly. The criminal country.
Yeah, and or you can be killed. Like you can be beheaded. And so he basically was just like, I'm not going to stop. And now at this point, he had married a woman, but there's no recording of who he had married. But they had 4 children. The first daughter was blind, and so now he's getting in trouble. Like he's a household name now. People know John Bunyan because he's just like, he's a preacher and he's going for it, and no one can stop him. You know, so they're all like, oh, that guy that won't shut up. And you know, just like, sit down and be quiet, John. Stop preaching. You're getting us all in trouble. You know, he was just like, no, like I'm going to preach the word of God. And he actually, he talks about this in one of his, he says, I will stay in prison till the moss grows on my eyelids rather than disobey God.
Wow. Come on.
And so he went to prison for 12 years. That was like the largest extent of his imprisonment. And the most interesting thing is that he wrote A Pilgrim's Progress while he was in prison.
Incredible. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. And I think that was the first book that he wrote. It wasn't published until about 3 years after he was released from prison, but it's just, you know, I imagine that John Bunyan was the type of guy that like just couldn't settle himself down. Like he just had to keep going. He just
absolutely. Like, if you write 60 books and by the time you're 60 years old, you're not sleeping.
No, you're not sleeping. But it made me wonder, like, you know, some of us need we need to like go to jail before we get something out of us.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
totally.
I wonder if he just like couldn't sit still long enough to write anything. And all of a sudden he goes to jail and all this stuff starts coming out of him. And, you know, even after he died, it was even more popular. Like we're still reading this book today, like hundreds of years later, and it's having the same impact. And so, just like, I just found that really fascinating because sometimes, you know, for us, when we moved to the desert, and I left ministry and I left all this stuff, and I'm home full time with my kids. I don't know anybody. I'm not having play dates. I'm not hanging out. I'm like at home. And like, I've had these thoughts before, like, God, like, what are you doing to me? I feel like I'm literally
Am I Job?
I'm in prison right now. Like, what do you want out of me? Like, God is squeezing something out of me right now. Amen. And I don't know what it is. I just thought that was cool. He was like a modern day Paul, you know, and Paul wrote his letters from prison.
Absolutely.
You know, ministry doesn't stop when you're incarcerated.
Amen. Amen. I love that. And also what I love about that is often we think of the persecuted church in, the Middle East or in China or in North Korea. But to think of these people who were persecuted for their faith in England, in, these countries, only a few hundred years ago, is actually pretty crazy. And it's sort of eye-opening for us as well, of how quickly things can change in the future as well, and how ready we need to be to defend our faith and to have that deep faith and commitment to God. So yeah, I love that about John.
Absolutely. And even before he I think it was a year and a half before he went to prison, his wife passed away.
Wow.
And he was 1 year with 4 kids and a blind daughter. Wow. And then just before he went to prison, I believe he married an 18-year-old girl named Elizabeth.
Wow.
And she took care of his children for the entire time, and she worked hard to try and get him out of jail. But they had no money because he couldn't work. So they relied on the church's generosity to provide. So her and his 4 children lived basically off of whatever the churches could provide for them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hopefully it was more than secondhand clothes.
Well, you never know, right? I mean, I don't think England was rich at that point.
Yeah, that's true.
It's pretty bad, but I think like it is interesting. Like, I mean, this guy didn't live an easy life, and he had every opportunity to, just not do it. He had every opportunity to just quit preaching. Yeah. Stop fulfilling the call of God in his life, to just, hunker down, keep his mouth shut, work, become a tinker, provide for the kids. And but like, I don't know, he just, the conviction that he had, even in that quote that I read, where he's like, I'd rather let, I'll stay in prison till the moss grows on my eyelids, rather than disobey God. So he had such an intense an intense conviction about serving the Lord through that.
That's so beautiful.
So, and the other interesting thing was that from prison, he actually was pastoring. So the church, the Bedford Meeting Church, where he kind of had his conversion, they asked him while he was in prison. They were like, hey, would you mind being the pastor of our church? And he accepted.
Wow.
So he writes sermons. Yeah, so this is, I believe, where most of his other books came from. They were expounded sermons. So he would write sermons from prison and they would read them. And so that's how he pastored. Yeah.
Wow. How long did he do that for? The whole 12 years or?
The whole 12 years, yeah. Well, I believe it was. I mean, I don't have the exact dates, but I believe it was his duration.
Wow.
Could have been a year or two into it, but
wow, that's amazing. Incredible. So Tiff, that's a great background to him and his spiritual formation and everything. Can you tell us, I know you've mentioned some of the big works, but can you tell us some more about, what is he most well known for? What are these works? What are they all about? And then if there's some big events that he sort of, went through in his life and that sort of thing, that would be great as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest one is Pilgrim's Progress. Yeah. And someone said it is regarded as one of the most significant works of religious theological fiction.
Wow.
So, yeah, in English literature. So it's because the whole thing is an allegory about the Christian life. He makes it so understandable. It's not like, you're basically eating theological syrup. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yes.
It's
you don't know there's broccoli in there, but it's in there.
No. Yeah.
Amazing.
Exactly. And it's like a child can understand it, and an adult. And I was talking to some friends, like, hey, did you ever read that book? And my one friend was like, I just started reading it to my kids, and she said I had to buy the adult copy for myself because she was like, I was so raptured with it. And she said, like, so many big theological ideas for the Christian life. So I mean, I would recommend it for new Christians, to be honest.
Amazing. Totally.
It is so good. And I actually wanted to show you this copy.
Yes, I love it.
This is such a cool copy. I just got this
Yeah.
from a it's Little Pilgrim's Big Journey. So if you're a parent out there
Amazing.
and you want to read Pilgrim's Progress to your kid, the main book is a little wordy, is a little heady. There's no pictures really.
Yeah.
You can get some that are illustrated, but I would highly recommend this. This just came out last
Awesome.
year. It was
Wow.
printed in Canada,
Yes.
which is good for Americans though, because it's cheaper for you. But the back says, believe the king's word, follow the king's path, and seek the king's city.
Beautiful.
And that's kind
I
of like
love
the
that.
book summed up. So this is by, I want to tell you, I think it's called Leto Press.
Okay.
Oh, Lethos. Lethos.
Okay.
Lithos. Lethoskids.com. But
Awesome.
anyway, it's a beautiful, it's illustrated and it's
gorgeous.
paraphrased.
Oh,
it's
beautiful.
paraphrased for kids. So I'm going to start reading this to my kid. But anyway,
Beautiful.
highly recommend if you want to read this to your kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's a huge one.
And what sort of happens throughout that book? If you could tell us, like, maybe give us a bit of a rundown on
man,
what it's all about.
There's so much. Okay, so
yeah.
There's 2 parts to this book.
Yeah.
And basically, I couldn't even like give you all of the characters' names, but every section of the book blends into a new character.
Yeah.
And he's on a new journey to somewhere else. Okay, so he goes to the city of destruction. There's obviously a lot of like negative ones because how many know it in life? It's not all great.
Yeah.
So the city of destruction, the city of despair, the interpreter's house, the place of deliverance, the place beautiful, the valley of humiliation, Vanity Fair. So he basically has a Bible in his hands and he's on this journey and he knows he has to get to the king's city.
So good.
And so he it's just like it's a huge big picture of this boy named Christian who is on his way to the kingdom and he's seeking the king. And he has this book in his hand and it's full of truth and he has to use and read the truth to set him free for these different situations that he faces, the different people that he encounters and the different struggles that he encounters. And so it's just about him on his journey to the kingdom. And of course, it's a full simile for us as Christians on our way to the kingdom of God, right? And we are obviously already members of the kingdom of God, but our eventual destination in eternity.
So beautiful.
So yeah, that's basically it. And there's 2 parts to it. Like there's 2 full sections to the book. He wrote a follow-up one. So the first section is just about Christian being on his way to the city. And then the second part of the book, which I actually have not read, but I am going to, it's about him getting married and having a family.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
So, yeah. And you know what? I really wish someone would make a movie, like a Pilgrim's Progress movie. I feel like this would be just as cool as like Lord of the Rings.
Absolutely. I've seen like a cartoon version of it. I don't know if you've seen the cartoon one. Your kids will probably love it. Yeah.
Really?
I'll send you the link for you girls. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I've never seen a live. I agree with you. It's right up there with like Narnia and Lord of the Rings, 100%.
But like far more. It's far more accurately Christian. You know, you're not like
not second guessing. Yeah.
But,
well, because the names of the people are literally like evangelist and hopeful and stuff like that, aren't they?
And patience.
Faithful. And
yeah. So, and piety. One of them is piety. And one
very
of them
explicit.
Yeah, exactly. So so anyway, it's a very explicitly lovely
Christian
book.
thing. Yeah.
It is. So then another book, which, okay, I'm not going to lie to you, I have not read his other works.
Yeah, neither have I. So you're teaching me about him. I don't know his other ones. I've read Pilgrim's Progress, but not the other ones.
So he has one called Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners, and this one kind of dialogues his conversion.
Okay.
And it talks about some of the things that he went through as a child, and in the parliamentary army days,
Okay.
and then his experience in life and in ministry, and then it's also a theological book talking about the grace of God, the doctrine of grace and sin.
Wow, cool.
And I'm excited to read that one because I feel like that's going to be, it's going to be intense. And there's like
Yeah.
I've read some quotes from it, and yeah, it sounds really good. And then the third one would be uh this would be his next biggest book. I'd say
Yep.
he's probably most well known for these three books, like Pilgrim's
Yep.
Progress, Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners, and then The Holy War. I believe it's about just like being holiness, like the holiness, and living a holy life, and the war within,
Yeah.
the war
Wow.
for holiness, you know, because of
Totally.
course it is a war um that we struggle with in our daily lives.
Yeah.
So he is a very great guy.
Yes. Well, on that as well, maybe Tiff, can you tell us a little bit about like, well, how do we connect that to like our cultural context? Like, what can we get out of John Bunyan's, say, Pilgrim's Progress and his work and his writing and even his life? How can that sort of inspire us and equip us in this cultural moment that we're living in right now?
Yeah, well, I think it's important for us to have a theology of suffering, an accurate
Yeah, wow.
theology of suffering. And I think that we've come out of a time of great prosperity and
Yes.
great pleasure.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my mom about this the other day. You know, we were talking about like the sin of Sodom, and
Yeah, wow.
what, like, why did God choose to, to just do away with that
Yeah.
entire place? You know,
Yeah.
and basically their sin was, um, they had an abundance of bread. They
Mm.
had they had idle hands,
Mm.
and what was the third one? They abundance of bread, idle hands, and I think it had something to do with pleasure.
Wow.
But basically, like, they, I think of just our culture, and I think of the times that, yeah, we have an abundance of bread. We have whatever we
Mm.
want. It's at our
Yeah,
it's at our fingertips. We have
totally.
pleasure. We have an abundance of
Yeah.
pleasure, and it's an anything you want society, and
Mm.
anything goes because everything's accessible,
Yeah.
and we want moral relativity, and we
Mm-hmm.
want to be able to justify what we're doing and what breed of
Totally.
sin we're into, and I also think it creeps into the church when people, when they can't handle,
Mm.
um the luxury taken away, or they can't handle,
Yeah.
the doctrine of sin. Oh, like, oh, you mean to be more like Jesus, I have to suffer more? Like,
Mm.
oh, you mean to be more like Jesus, I have to die to myself more?
Wow.
Because
Yeah.
I don't want to. And
Mm.
I think, when we read about authors and we
Mm.
think of people who had such insane, immense suffering in their lives,
Yeah.
uh, it's important to remember that, you know
Mm.
we too are supposed to share in the suffering of Christ. And it's
Wow.
important to remember that, like, these people didn't view
Mm.
this earth as their home. They
Yeah,
truly
that's great. Come
viewed,
on.
like, when I read Pilgrim's Progress, like,
Yeah.
you see this man's perspective. His
Totally.
perspective was not on earth. He
Totally.
knew his destination wasn't here.
Mm.
So he just had such a clear glimpse
Mm.
of eternity. And,
Yeah.
I can think of one other book that I've read that was really a really powerful eternal allegory, and that was by John Bevere. He wrote Driven by Eternity, and the first portion of that book, he tells an allegory about eternity. And I remember reading that and
Mm.
thinking of Pilgrim's Progress because
Yeah,
it was
wow.
like so accurate.
Wow.
And I would highly recommend that book to someone who wants to get that, like,
Mm.
3,000 foot level.
Perspective.
But
Yeah.
I really appreciate John Bunyan's,
Mm.
like, learning about his life and understanding
Yeah.
for the context from which he wrote
Yeah.
was understanding God's grace, understanding God's mercy, understanding eternity, and understanding like, yeah, suffering happens and it doesn't push me further from God. I can know God through my suffering. I
Yeah,
can know him
absolutely.
deeper.
Yeah,
So
totally.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's a good word for our day.
totally,
I think
totally
it's a good
agree.
word for our young people, you know?
Absolutely. Especially as the world is getting darker and darker and crazier. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely a message of hope, I think, to say no matter what, like he's the
Yeah,
solid rock on which we stand, you know. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
And there's so many young people that they just have this super small
Mm.
um it's just such a small worldview. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes,
Like we're
yeah.
on our phones all day, and young people
Yeah.
are on their phones all day, and their world, although they think it's big because of internet and social media, it's
Yeah.
not. It's so small. And I
Mm.
think, like, even for my kids, the greatest thing that I can impart to my children is a reality of a life outside of this, that
Wow.
this doesn't this is not, like, this is your reality right in this moment, but this is not going to be your reality in heaven. Like, I
Right.
want to give you a picture
Mm.
of what your life is going to look like in heaven, and I want to give you
Beautiful.
a glimpse of that so you can live your life on purpose.
Come on.
And yeah, and not get caught up in just whatever the culture wants to say or do, or how they want to treat you, like, you know just fixing your eyes on what's real.
Come
So
on.
that's really
I love that, Tiff. That's so good. That's so good.
cool.
Can you share maybe a few of your favorite quotes from John Bunyan?
Yeah,
Some of his most famous quotes, or something that sort of impacted you.
yes. So um okay, so just on that whole thought of like suffering and sorrow, like he has some deep quotes that you're like, whoa, okay, this guy has been through it. And one
Wow.
thing that he says in Pilgrim's Progress is, he says, dark clouds bring waters when the bright bring none. So,
Wow.
just that thought that, like, don't always
Mm.
want sunshine, because if there's always
Mm.
sunshine, there's no rain, and we need rain.
Wow. Yeah,
We need
beautiful.
the rain. And another one he said is, it is said that in some countries trees will grow but will bear no fruit because there's no winter there.
Wow.
So, like, you need a winter season, right?
Yeah, that's
You
great.
need that season where, like, everything looks barren, but there's actually something going on. There's something going on deep, right? Because the roots need rest. And I've also actually heard a sermon which was really cool, where it talked about how during the winter season, um, all of the nutrients go from the branches to the roots,
Wow.
and they all of the nutrients go right back down into the root system, and it supports the root system all year round, so that the next year the tree bears more fruit because it supports
Amazing.
the root system. Yeah, isn't that a good thought?
Beautiful. Yeah, it's a great picture.
Yeah. um so, oh, this is a good one. What God says is best, indeed is best, though all men in the world are against it.
Wow.
Seeing then that God prefers his religion, seeing God prefers a tender conscience, seeing they that make themselves fools for the kingdom of heaven are wisest, and that the poor man that loves Christ is richer than the greatest man in the world that hates him, shame, depart thou. Oh, sorry. Shame, depart, thou art an enemy to my salvation.
Wow.
Isn't
That's
that
powerful.
cool?
Yeah, I love that one.
So he's like, hey, I'm not receiving shame. Has no,
Mm.
because I mean, think of the shame that
Yeah.
you would feel if you were in prison and you had a wife and
Yeah.
4 kids, and you're like, I feel ashamed of myself. I can't even
Yeah.
provide. I can't even, like, do what my one responsibility is for my family, to help them. So I bet he wrote that while he was just like battling with that
Mm.
internal struggle of, like, I should be providing for my family. What am I doing in
Yeah.
prison?
Wow.
You
Wow.
know, but God had different plans
Yeah,
for
and
that.
he's obviously having that revelation as he's writing of that
Yeah,
reality that, yeah, God supersedes that. I love that.
Exactly. This one's cool. He says,
Yeah.
the man that takes up religion for the world will throw away religion for the world.
Yes, totally.
Right. So it is interesting, like having like, oh, you want a public ministry? Well, wait till they turn on you.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of that quote, like, those that live by the sword will die by the sword.
Yeah.
Or if you live for the praises of men, you'll die by the
Yes.
criticism.
Absolutely.
You know, those are good too.
love that.
He talks. This one's in the Holy War. He
Yep.
says, nothing can hurt you except sin. Nothing can grieve me except sin. Nothing can defeat you except sin. Therefore, be on your guard, my man soul.
Wow, beautiful.
Yeah. And this is, I'll give you another one here. Pray often, for prayer is a shield to the soul, a sacrifice to God, and a scourge for Satan.
Yes, come on. I love any quotes about prayer.
Yeah. Tell me about it. I need to be reminded more often to pray too.
Yes, same.
It's like, yeah, give me all the quotes on prayer. I need that. My soul needs that.
Totally. And I think it's great because I think his revelation of prayer just shows you that in those dark moments as he's sitting in jail and he's, you know, thinking about his kids and his wife and all that sort of stuff, he has that deep relationship with God where it's just him and God, and he's talking to God and God's giving him revelation and he's writing. And yeah, I love that picture of that relationship that he had.
Yeah, he was definitely a really interesting guy. He the interesting thing was that his sorry, I'm trying to organize my thoughts here.
No, you're right.
For Pilgrim's Progress, when it was published 3 years, right, outside of after he got out of prison. So he really made no money immediately off of that. But it ended up being one of the first novels that was published that broke 1,300 copies made. Like,
amazing.
It broke the record.
Wow.
Yeah. And it says that he made less money than his publisher. So like, for me, I'm like trying to work out, I'm like, okay, was he just not a savvy businessman? Or was he honestly just like, this is for the Lord and I'm not trying to make money, you know? Like, I just want this book to get out, and I feel like God put this in my heart, so I don't care, you know, like, let it just make money and let, like, but, you know, apparently he didn't die he didn't die in poverty. So, you know, after he was released from prison, he was able to provide for his family. He was still in popularity. People still wanted to have him come preach. He was writing more books. He was selling, you know, his book. But apparently, so he died when did he die? So he was 60 years old, right, when he died. And so he died in 1688, I believe it was.
Yeah. Wow.
No, wait a second. Yeah, 1688. And his book was published in 1678. And 4 years after he died, because he died like, I don't know, 60 years old, that's pretty young, right? Yeah. And he was on the way somewhere. He got a cold or a flu, and it killed him.
He got COVID.
Yeah, it was kind of sad. I was like, oh, that's how he died. Okay.
Yeah, that's a bit depressing.
But a lot of authors, a lot of great people sometimes have just like these measly deaths. Where you're like, oh, like, okay, I thought like it would have been more heroic than that, you know?
Yeah. Cut his toe on a nail, died 3 hours later.
Literally.
Yeah.
Sad. But they estimated that after he died, over a span of like 10 years, they had published over 100,000 copies of the book.
Oh my
And
gosh, wow.
it was translated into like 3 different languages within a couple of years because it was in such high demand.
Amazing.
And he became popularized, I think, because of what he stood for. Like, because like word traveled, right? That he was like this rebel preacher.
Yeah.
And that he was like really like, you know, ruffling the feathers of the leaders in
Yeah.
England and the church leaders. And, you know, obviously Reformed theology had already swept through a lot of the other European countries. And England was kind of, I guess, behind the times. So to this day, it's been translated into 200 and I think 200 languages.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Amazing.
it's really popular, but it you know, it's always after the death of someone that something takes off.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah.
You never know why.
Totally.
It's like,
Their legacy.
how come these people were not, you know, just gold in the eyes of people in their own time? Why was it always after their death? But perhaps they were people who came before, kind of like a John the Baptist, to, you know, prepare the way for the next generation.
Totally.
To make a way and to do a work that, you know, was maybe for the next generation, not necessarily for.
Yeah, it's almost like they're writing prophetically or speaking prophetically into the future. And especially John Bunyan with Pilgrim's Progress. I think that's been one of the most popular texts for, you know, many colleges and schools, as you said, Christians everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we appreciate the sacrifice, you know, that he made to get that. And I appreciate the things that he went through. And sometimes I think, okay, God, like help me to see with spiritual eyes.
Yeah.
And I go through seasons where I feel like I'm suffering for no reason. Or I feel like things are happening in my life where I'm like, what the heck? Why?
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, things that don't make sense. Help me to see with spiritual eyes, because maybe God is trying to bring something out of me too. And perhaps God is wanting to prepare my heart for something that's about to happen and for the next generation or whatever generation. So looking at trials and looking at suffering with spiritual eyes, I think even just the way that he must have had that, the sensitivity, you know. I mean, how do you not fall into depression? Like, how do you not? And maybe he did, and maybe that's where he gathered some of those deep revelations.
Wow.
And gathered the strength to write and be under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So anyway.
Now that's awesome, Tiff. Do you have any fun facts about John Bunyan? We like to try and sort of poke and prod to find some unusual things about these people. Do you know any fun facts?
Okay, so one fun fact was that a bunch of the illustrations from Pilgrim's Progress were actually just actual places. So a lot of So
he's not being that imaginative.
Right, exactly. The straight gate.
Yeah.
In Pilgrim's Progress is a version of the Wicket Gate at Elstow Abbey Church.
Oh, wow.
And then the Slough of Despond is a reflection of Squitch Fen, which was a wet and mossy area near his cottage where he lived. And then the Delectable Mountains was an image of the Chiltern Hills surrounding Bedfordshire. And even characters like Evangelist were reflections of some of the people in his lives that influenced him.
Awesome.
So I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah.
Because he drew inspiration from different people.
Very cool.
So, you know what? I feel like I gave you all of my gold.
That's great. Straight out the gate. We love that. That's cool.
There was one kind of a scandal that he was involved in.
Okay.
But I thought it was really funny because today it's not a scandal, but back then back then with all of the like propriety, you know, like men and women's propriety. I guess there was a young woman that he gave a ride home to.
He
And
didn't.
yeah, and I think it was like on horseback or something. And I guess like that's a big no-no, right?
Yeah.
So like, I mean, I love Pride and Prejudice and, you know, all those old movies, those
Yeah,
period
same.
dramas. So
Totally.
like, you know, like it's propriety. It's not proprietous.
Yes, absolutely. You don't
So
give girls a ride on horseback.
no, you don't.
What was
And
he
I
thinking?
believe, I don't, yeah. It was like home from church and it was raining or something stupid like that. And
Of
this
course.
girl later was like, you know, word got out and the scandal grew. And he was like, yo, like nothing happened. Like, I don't know. But some people were just like up in arms about it. So that was
Wow.
one little thing that he, you know,
That's fun.
was involved in that he probably shouldn't have. Um, but yeah, other than that, like, okay, so I thought the one story about his army days when that kid came into his rooms, like switch places with
Yeah,
me.
that's incredible.
That was crazy. Um, the other thing I thought that was interesting that also is kind of scandalous is that he married an 18-year-old girl.
Absolutely. You mentioned that before, and we didn't even highlight that.
I know. And it was 1 year after his wife died. I mean, he did have 4 kids, so he's like, yeah, I need
Yeah.
a wet nurse. Like, need,
Wet
he,
nurse.
he probably like put it in the local newspaper, you know.
Yeah. Must
Like,
be able to breastfeed. Um, so this guy, how old was he? How old was John Bunyan? Do we know? If he had 4 kids.
that's an excellent question. I don't know how old he was, but I think he would have been in his 30s. Yeah, I think
Wow.
so. I mean, like, it wasn't like, oh, this like 50-year-old man is looking for an 18-year-old, you know, but still, it was old enough that like clearly he was an eligible bachelor. If an 18-year-old agrees,
True.
and like, yeah,
And if
okay,
some
maybe
girls
he wasn't that old.
riding a horse will be like, it's raining, can you please give me a lift?
I don't know when that happened. I don't know if he was married
Yeah.
or single or a widower, or I don't know when that happened.
Maybe
but
she was the 18-year-old girl.
ooh, now
The
you're
plot
on
thickens.
something.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And you know what else is interesting is that his first wife, they literally have no record of her.
Yeah, it's
They have no
crazy.
record of her, but they have a record of him writing about the 2 things that they got married with. Apparently, they were dirt poor when they got married. And her father was like a devout Christian. She entered the marriage with 2 books. One was
Wow.
on heaven and one was on piety, and that's all they had. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
So, you know, like they were just a cute little Christian couple with like
Yeah.
nothing but, you know, 2 books, and
Beautiful.
they made a go of it. You know, so that's,
And it
I mean,
worked
that's
out well.
yeah, it worked out well apparently. But that does give you a glimpse of like how pauve it kind of was in the 1600s.
Totally.
Like, you know, people are
Absolutely.
like I don't know, like where were the wedding gifts? You know, I guess
Yeah.
people were that poor.
Were they the gifts? The 2 books?
I guess like they were from her dad, so
Yeah. Wow.
yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome, Tiff. Yeah. Sorry. Did you want to say something else about John Bunyan?
So one other thing he said while he was in prison,
Yeah.
because I did ask this question of myself. I was thinking like, if my husband was in prison for preaching and it was like going year after year and like we're not being provided for as a family, like, yeah. So apparently his second wife Elizabeth did everything she could to get him out of prison. And like she appealed to the higher court, she appealed to whatever, she tried to gather money to like pay, you know, the bail or whatever, and to no avail. But he had said to her, oh, I saw in this condition, I was a man who was pulling down his house upon the head of his wife and children, yet I thought, I must do it, I must do it.
Wow.
I know. And I thought, like, at what point do you go, stop?
Yeah.
Stop doing this, John? Like, you're like, he literally said, like, I saw the condition. I was pulling my house down upon my wife and children. and yet I thought I must do it. And I'm like, man, like what kind of a resolve do you have to have and a conviction that like this isn't just about, you know, like, Lord, okay, provide for my family, but like I don't know, I just like it spins my wheels a bit. So I'd like to get into his head a little bit, and I feel like if I read more of his work, I'm gonna find out maybe some of those deeper thoughts.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I want to go read Pilgrim's Progress again.
I know, same
here. So good, yeah.
I'm excited to read this version to my kids too.
Yeah. Oh, that'll be so fun. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Tiff, thank you so much for telling us all about John Bunyan. I feel like I've learned a lot about John Bunyan. I hardly knew anything about him before this, so this has just been absolute gold, and you are gorgeous. You're wonderful. Thank you so much for being a part of the episode. If people want to find you, where can they find you? On Instagram?
Yep. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me at Bayfield Beach here while I'm in Canada.
Yes. When the borders open and we can finally come to America.
Yeah. No, Instagram would be the best place if you want to follow.
And is your handle at Finocchio T?
It's Finocchio T, yes.
Finocchio T.
Or Tiffany Voss.
Or it's Tiffany Voss.
Yeah, it's my email handle, so I just thought I'd keep.
Yeah, awesome. No, thank you so much for being a part of it. And thank you everyone else for joining us today. It's been so good to have you with us on the Eagle and Child podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for tuning into the Eagle and Child podcast. That's all from us for today. If you want to support us, you can like, subscribe, or drop us a review. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Eagle and Child podcast. We'll catch you next time. Much love.